In this new episode of the Masters of Beautiful Achievements, what can we learn from the Masters on how to apply natural science, systems thinking, and personal leadership to realize these beautiful achievements? My name is Alexander Prince, and it is an honor you are listening to this episode. A small gratitude for those who are able to support the podcast through monthly or one-time donations. The links to contribute can be found in the description below. And now it's time to enjoy the conversation with today's masters. And, you can start with that.
Okay. So my current research is into regional development agencies. Those are local government-sponsored agencies who invest in the Dutch provinces. They basically fund startups that cannot get funding in the marketplace.
And they're quite active at the moment.
Yes, very active. They invest a couple of billion, but they love to invest almost 10 billion or so.
Mm-hmm.
And that means they need more funding from the government, but also ideally co-funding from pension funds.
And they are really risk averse for these kind of things.
Yes, apart from one of them basically, but
Which one?
PME.
Okay.
So PME has been investing in startups since 2018 when they co-funded Innovation Industries, which is in their own industry, which helped to fund successes like Nearfield.
PME is what kind of?
It's the metal electrics pension fund.
So they're investing in their own future.
Exactly. That's the whole point. Investing in their own future. And their participants, they love that. But ideally, the other pension funds do the same. So currently less than 0.1% of pension assets goes into startups.
Yeah.
So that's minimal. Whereas if they'd invest 0.5% of their investments in startups, then you'd have 15 billion or so to invest. So
that is huge money.
Yes, yeah, indeed.
But it also requires some vision of the future of industry, the industry in the Netherlands or in the industry in general.
Well, to some extent. So you need a vision on the necessary transitions and innovations needed for them.
Yeah.
And the top of the pension funds, they have that, the large ones. And their struggle, though, is to get it into their current models and their delegated asset manager to actually do that. So the research we already did showed that the main bottleneck to pension fund investing in startups is the pension funds themselves.
And the fund managers themselves, I assume.
Yeah, so the delegated asset managers, where traditionally trained people try to do everything according to econometric models and outdated legal stuff. That's basically the trouble that the boards need to overcome.
Today I have Willem Schramade, the Dutch pronunciation. Do I have to say Professor Willem Schramade?
No, you can, but you don't need to.
With Willem today, I'm going to talk about basically, let's say, four aspects of capitalism, corporate governance, sustainability, and value creation. These are sort of the four points he's basically been working in his active career and also in the research you're doing at the moment. Could you just introduce yourself a little bit? Which academies are you professor of and from, and associate?
Sure.
Just so people have an overview of your background.
Yeah, no, I'm a professor of finance at Nijrode Business University. So finance is my background. So the four areas that you mentioned, they are indeed my focus areas, but starting from finance, basically. I'm also associated with RSM, Rotterdam School of Management, where I am a fellow of the Erasmus Platform for Sustainable Value Creation. And Erasmus is also where I had my PhD in earlier positions. But my current position is at Nijrode, where I spent 80% of my time, plus some things on the side, basically.
How did you ended up with the focus on, let's say, that finance should change in the way we're doing at the moment? Because I think I've phrased it out the best way.
Well, that's actually a long time ago, and it's been a slow process. So I've been trained in business economics. I did my master's in Tilburg and my PhD in Rotterdam, both in business. And I worked as an investor at Robeco and NNIP and Schroders. And basically, back in 2009, we got a new CEO at Robeco, and he told us, "Hey, you have to integrate sustainability into your analysis." And we had no clue how to do that. We just got some scores from Zurich, from our subsidiary there. However, at the same time, I was also taking up new coverage. So I went from the industrial sector to the basic materials sector.
Yeah.
And what struck me there was that some companies were thriving because of sustainability tailwinds, and others were struggling with sustainability headwinds. So some chemicals companies were making a lot of money out of providing the car industry with solutions, so lightweighting of materials or catalysis, those kind of things. And at the same time, I saw mining companies losing billions because they forgot to do their environmental permitting.
So this was quite two extremes.
Yeah, but it was all in the same sector. And so it meant for me, hey, this connection between finance, valuation on the one hand and sustainability on the other hand, it's the business model.
Yeah.
And sustainability can affect the business model, which in turn hits your valuation. So
but that depends on how you define sustainability then. Because it has become...
It's very broad, but to make it concrete, these mining companies, one of them, it's called Anglo-American, they wanted to do an iron ore project in Brazil. And they indeed forgot to do the environmental permitting, which meant that they had to get it done later on. And then their project was delayed by like 5 years, and it didn't cost 2.5 billion, but 13 billion. So it's a clear impact. And at the same time, in their home country, they were
which is
South Africa. They were the leader of a platinum oligopoly, and still they didn't make money there because they were basically blackmailed by the local government and the unions into overpaying their unions, and they had strikes all the time. So basically, social issues cut their profit in South Africa, and environmental issues hurt their profitability in Brazil, and these were really large numbers. So that for me, that really was the message. Hey, we have to take these things into account in normal finance.
As an investor.
So this was still the phase of outside in single materiality.
Yeah.
We were investing with an ESG lens, but we're not investing to make the world better or something like that.
Yeah.
That only came later when I was at NNIP running an impact equities fund. And there the goal also was to really invest in companies that made the world better, which is a different angle, because then you also have to make sure that these companies are net positive, basically, so that the positive externalities are larger than the negative ones, and that the negative ones are minimal.
And yet you need to scale them.
Yes, yeah, but it wasn't a listed equity fund, so it was always at scale already.
Okay, so they've proven track record.
Yeah, with startups, it's different, because then it becomes, you still have the scale challenge ahead of you. And that's why with startups, it's so much linked to innovation as well. It's really hard to separate those two, but that's another storyline, I guess. But the original question was like, how did I end up here? And yeah, I mean, I was trained also at PwC before I became an investor at evaluating intangible assets. And intangible assets are basically assets that are often not even really on the balance sheet. So the technical definition of an asset is a cash generating unit, but they're not always capitalized. So, for example, when you do a takeover and you pay much more than the book price, that's called goodwill, and you have to do a purchase price allocation to assess, hey, why is it worthwhile to pay more? So I was involved in valuing client relationships and those kind of things. And that was really helpful in my understanding of sustainability in finance as well, because it's basically about how you use assets to make money, but also how these assets then affect what you do. Mm-hmm. And it's a continuous feedback loop. And that's really hard to distinguish. And in the end, I'd say you'd almost have to look at it more like a biologist than the typical economist approach of linearity and stuff like that.
Why are you saying that? Because it's not a common perspective.
I know it's not very common, but it's
what distinguishes a biologist from an economist?
It's more like an evolutionary perspective that things happen in a certain context.
Yeah.
Whereas you look at it more holistically, whereas economists are very much, and also psychologists, by the way, lots of social scientists and natural scientists are focused on identifying a relationship between X and Y. And of course, then there are some other side issues that affect that. But they often fail to really take into account the context in which it's happening.
This is a sidestep, because this is interesting. Because the way you're describing it, by me, then suddenly comes Limits to Growth from the Club of Rome, where they were able to distill it. I think with 8 indicators from a systems thinking perspective, how they would interact with each other.
Yeah.
And they did a different scenario analysis of forecasting how certain indicators would evolve over time. Interesting enough, the analysis still stands.
Yeah.
And they broke it down to very simple indicators.
Yeah. But in a real world analysis, in a very specific situation, that doesn't work. CO2, fine, it's the same everywhere in the world, but scarcity of water is something completely different depending on where you are. Same with all kinds of other of these planetary boundaries challenges. And in fact, everything in life, there's always lots of materials have some kind of poisonous content, but it's not lethal, right? Depending on what the limits are.
And in which,
even in our water, we have all kinds of stuff that's.
But it's also in concentration, but also the interaction with and
exactly
and in which molecule construction they are set up.
Mm-hmm. Indeed, but these kind of relations tend to be largely ignored because if they haven't been relevant before, people assume that they're not that relevant in the future either.
That's quite linear.
Yeah. No, but that's how economic models in finance typically work. Risk estimation in finance is extremely simplistic. It's it looks very sophisticated because they use all kinds of econometric methods for it, but it's basically about the past returns and how volatile they were versus some kind of benchmark.
And that is simplistic.
Yeah, so it doesn't account for anything that might change in the future in that sense.
But is that a negligence from the economics point of view? Because you can think about what possible impacts something could have.
Yeah, but you can think about it, but you cannot fit it back into the model, and or you can, but then it's really hard, and it becomes different from the typical model inputs. And people are used to think in terms of these inputs. So all these people at pension funds, they're trained in econometric models about asset allocation and assumptions about risk and return. And if you want to put in transition risk there, it doesn't compute. And the same with credit risk models in banking, for example.
Interesting. I mean, the word still resonates. You have to think like a biologist.
Yeah, and I don't have the full answer there yet, but
because the thing is, for me, for a biologist, but it's because I think in natural science, which is physics, biology, and green chemistry, and if you follow the matter, you see where everything is dispersing and how nature is repurposing something and then create something new.
Yeah.
Systems thinking becomes an essential part because ecosystems collaborate with each other, and then you see the economic models. If we're talking about economics, but you also see that diversity is a key aspect of nature.
Mm-hmm.
If you go monoculture, you're asking for problems.
Yeah, and we are purely monoculture in the financial sector because they all use the same models.
Wow. But that is a high risk.
Absolutely. That's why we have so many financial crises as well. No, but there's this great book by David Sloan Wilson, This View of Life. I read it.
One time?
David Sloan Wilson,
yeah.
This View of Life or This View on Life. I'm not sure. And he basically argues that social scientists, including economics and management, would benefit a lot from taking more of an evolutionary perspective. And there's a whole stream in economics on ecological economics, but it's still a side show.
Yeah, it's interesting you're mentioning this. I've read the book of Kate Raworth, The Donut Economy. And I valued, I think, the first 2 chapters because that was about economics from an environmental perspective and how economics originally was coined by Adam Smith and Keynes and what they wanted to create out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly the whole, the movement decided, okay, let's stop integrating nature. Let's cut it loose because then there is more profit. This is a little bit black and white.
Yeah,
but she talked about those environmental economics, and they were in tune how the economy, and eco for those who did Greek or Latin means house.
Yeah.
Economy is bookkeeping.
Yeah.
How the economy, the bookkeeping would work in the natural world, like ecology and the logic. And that's the only part of her book I really enjoyed because you got a totally different perspective on economics who actually were working on creating the social science it is now, but then one that is embedded in the real world in our spaceship.
Yeah, I don't recall her book that well, to be honest. I read it many years ago, and
because I was triggered because you were mentioning that what are ecological economics?
It's a branch of economics that recognizes nonlinearities and systems thinking, but it's not there's no grand paradigm there yet, so I think it's quite scattered. But Hans Stegeman wrote a really interesting PhD thesis.
The recent one from him.
Yes. So that's recommended reading, I would say. But that's still economics. I'm in finance, and there's no ecological finance yet. It should come into being for sure.
Help me with the difference between finance and economics.
Finance is essentially a branch of economics.
But that is allocation of money?
Yes. Yeah.
Based on economics.
Yeah. So and corporate finance in particular is basically about how to invest. It's the left-hand side of the balance sheet, and how to fund it, the right-hand side. So do you do that with debt or equity? Those kind of things. And it's overly focused on that right-hand side of the balance sheet. So do you
Which are where our mortgages are. And
yes, so do you use loans or stocks? And the loans, are they bonds or bank loans? Those kind of, I mean,
and that's where 2008 comes into play with,
yeah,
with bonds.
a lot of it is about that. But I think the part about investing is underappreciated. And should get more attention, and it should be much more about investing, not just for financial returns, but for integrated returns, as we call it in our book.
If you look at the past, has there been a period where the investing, which you say is lacking now, has been dominant?
Well, to some degree, yes. I mean, not in the sense that people were thinking in a really ecological way, but at least they were. I mean, over the past decades, it's been about shareholder value, which is an extremely narrow concept. Whereas banking, for example, nowadays is about, I mean, they don't even have branches anymore. It's all about electronics. But 100 years ago, the local banker knew everyone in town, and he or she, or mostly he, could assess credit risk based on that. It was relationship banking.
Yeah.
So
that's a nice word.
So it was much more in tune with the local context, not by philosophy, but just because it happened like that. So in a way, it was more natural 100 years ago than it is right now. And it just got so automated, so numbers driven that you lose all, you lose all context.
Yeah,
and you just maximize the short-term financials at the expense of the social value, the environmental value, but even the long-term financial value. You don't optimize. You kill that as well because you underinvest in R&D and stuff like that.
So basically, maximizing the extraction of the social system.
Yes, there's too many incentives to game the system, basically. And you see it in the rising share of company profits in GDP, in the amount of share buybacks that companies have been doing, because it pays a lot to buy back your own shares, because then you drive up the stock prices of management, and management bonuses go up, et cetera, et cetera. So there's all kinds of strange and weird incentives in the financial system in that sense.
Because there is too much money, and the money needs to be put somewhere.
Well, not just because there's too much money, but because the money is directed at maximizing short-term money.
But is that also the definition of a corporate? I mean, I've read, so I think I read it in Kate's book, that in law, business law, you have a corporate, and the definition of a corporate is to maximize profit. Sort of in that way. I cannot recall correctly.
That's true, and it's not true. I mean, it's true in a US context, but it's not true in a continental European context. I mean,
well, that's interesting.
Because here, corporates are not supposed to be maximizing profits. They are they should be for the benefit of the corporation, and that's not necessarily maximizing profits.
So
it's really a US-centric idea to maximize profits, which has been gaining ground since the 1970s. But before that, European corporations were not around to maximize profits. Per se.
And then I understand the stories of Philips and I think Siemens and all the big corporations that were building houses and schools and hospitals and everything for the workforce.
And ASML is doing that now again as well, right?
Who?
ASML. Even though they're a stock listed company. So there's a difference between US stock-listed companies and European stock-listed companies. There's always still more of a social expectation from European companies.
How that triggers me one question. If you look at the global, how do you call that, change happening, or the rebalancing of powers at the moment, because the US has been extremely dominant. Also from a capital perspective, buying up everything they want, and China's basically doing the same. And I think in India you will have that same tendency maybe. How can Europe then keep its values in an extremely competitive environment where there is a race to the bottom? How can you race to the top without losing your competitiveness?
Well, that's a matter of rules, right? So if you stick to the Green Deal and strengthen it instead of weakening it, as they intend to do right now, you can just raise the bar. I mean, if you have the carbon border adjustment, then Chinese steel companies have to pay a huge carbon tax over the highly pollutive steel that they're exporting to us. So it's we're the largest market in the world. So in theory and in practice, we should be able to keep that bar very high.
Larger than China?
Yeah.
And we're larger than the US.
Yeah. The problem, though, is that we're not a fully integrated market, because if you want to get permission for a new product here, you have to get permission from all the separate countries instead of just one. And that's why they prefer to scale up in the US.
On the other hand, that is also the strength of different cultures.
No, but
the thing is, it's interesting because then you...
No, but that's a different thing.
Okay.
It's just a local regulation put up by local countries, whereas if they would decide to trust each other and have a joint regulation
based on the core values of the origin of the European Union.
Yeah, but usually it's not that. I mean, because but the differences in regulation. I mean, there's some exceptions there, but it's typically not a difference in culture. It's just that these countries want to have their autonomy, and then they put their own rules on top of what's happening in Europe. So it's a matter of not willing to share
protecting their own markets.
No, not even protecting their own markets.
Okay.
It's just some kind of pride that you need to have your own rules. It's really no more than that. It's and it's highly inefficient, and that's the tragedy of Europe, is that country level politicians are blaming Europe for all kinds of problems, whereas it's the countries that create the problems by sticking to their own. They all want exceptions for this and that, and it's. Yeah,
but it also means that having a common vision of what Europe could become, with the standards that belong to that. But because we're on this topic from the level playing field aspect, and it's interesting. If you look at the competitiveness between the European countries, and energy is one of those now competitive advantage that they are exploiting. If we take a step back, maybe take the view of a biologist into the conversation and think about sustainability and value creation, what would that mean if you would see the opportunities of having no pollution in Europe? For me, that is a USP for countries and for companies, because
absolutely,
if you have no pollution, everybody wants to live here, and you're a magnet for the global elite and everything that's connected to that.
Absolutely. Now, I mean, in theory, it's quite simple. If you aggressively build a green economy, you're not only lowering your CO2 footprint, it's also going to be a massive boon to your the air quality, water quality, all kinds of stuff. You attract more people because the quality of life here is better, which is already true, right? I mean, in the US, life expectancy has been falling, actually, especially among white males. But it's and also this energy disadvantage we currently have, it would fall away if we would invest massively in renewables, because then you wouldn't need all that oil stuff. I mean,
or invest in taking down the current factory and create a new one, because the whole technology is 50 years old.
Yeah, so we're crying about all kinds of factories that are leaving the Netherlands and Belgium as well, by the way. But it's usually low-tech stuff anyway. So I say it's an opportunity because it can open up the grid and stuff like that.
But on the other hand, those are also local operating companies.
Some.
And in the balance sheet, what I've learned in my short career as a management consultant, you should make a loss, because that is better for the mother company. That's how you flow the money through the system.
True, but it's but if it's really not profitable, then companies quit, right?
Yeah.
And also if it's if it has low economic added value and it's highly negative in terms of social and environmental, then why not shut it down completely? I mean, it's especially with this Tata Steel factory, for example. I mean, they should either close it and get the steel from other parts of Europe. I mean, there's overcapacity anyway, or they should green it completely. It's one of the two, but not some muddle through story.
Or relocate the whole.
Yeah, probably outside of the Netherlands. I mean, out of Spain or whatever.
No. The reason I'm challenging on that one is I'm following the technological trends. And the new steel factories, they're all run on hydrogen. They have no emissions. Yeah. It's state of the art. It's technology of 20th century, and not the ones from the 19th.
Exactly. SSAB has a great process, and if they can scale up, then they can supply all of Europe maybe on that. So
it's also about making choices then, from a European perspective.
Yes, and not just a Dutch perspective. I mean, we don't need all that capacity. It's fine if it's available in other parts of Europe. Where it gets more tricky is with chemicals. I mean, if certain parts of the chemical system shut down, you get all kinds of inefficiencies, and others start leaving as well. So it's trickier there, and same with the port. But with steel, I'd say rather simple.
On the chemicals, I've heard from Aramco, the Saudi Arabian oil company. They're creating the chemical factories next to the oil fields.
Yeah.
And the chemical tankers just distribute the chemicals all over the world at a cost that almost no country can compete with.
Yeah, true.
It's game over.
Yeah.
In that sense.
Yeah, although you might want to be not dependent on them in the same way that you have been dependent on them for oil. So... But here you get the huge choice between efficiency and resilience, and that's also why I think the biological perspective is so interesting.
Yeah,
the economists will always simply get the most efficient solution, and then we buy the cheapest stuff, and it means we become dependent on some geopolitical player. And COVID hits, and we're out of stock or something like that.
The cheapest stuff also does not include externalities.
Even that, but even if it would, you'd still get the other disadvantage, and all that is out of the equation if you look at it purely economically in terms of efficiency. Whereas in biology, in natural systems, there are always redundancies. But redundancies are inefficient according to traditional economic analysis. That means we don't allow them, whereas we should have much more buffers and stuff like that. But
nature's redundancies are a business model within nature.
Yeah.
Because if there is suddenly an overflow, an organism will jump in and solve that.
Yeah.
So every output has an input in nature.
Yeah, but in business, it might not work like that, and then sometimes.
Why not?
Well, in practice, it doesn't, right? I mean, I don't need to explain why, but it's just a matter of fact that we have all kinds of loose ends, and then they just dump it. So And that means there's a role for governments to step in. And so, for example, if we want to have a resilient grid, we probably need some kind of battery, which is not going to be efficient, but it would be valuable because it would basically work like insurance.
Interesting. I once did a research project with a School of Applied Science, and we were analyzing the PHA chain, which is a new polymer being developed out of bacteria, sort of like a fatty acid, but then polarized and still has the biological properties of being naturally decomposable in nature on our ambient conditions. And we've learned that the waste stream of that process was the largest quantity.
Okay.
And that would mean, why would you focus yourself on the high-end extraction, whereas if you would focus on the whole process, like an oil refinery, oil refinery does not waste anything, and that is the reason why they are so cheap. I spoke last year to one of these what do you call them? Founders of that company and the technology, and yes, they were now selling the lower grade because that is where the cash flow would start and be generated, and let other companies purify it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, but you have to be aware of that. Someone has to see it, and the value chain needs to be open to it as well. I mean, if it's controlled by an incumbent player, they can just block you. So market power is extremely important as well. And there's way too much market power. Large companies are too large. I mean, big tech, obviously, how they control everything, but even global food chains, there's too few players controlling too much of the flow there.
From a risk management perspective, and let's say scenario analysis, that would create a lot of red signals.
Yeah, it's a bit like the banks that are too big to fail, right?
Yeah.
And what you earlier said about the lack of diversity, those kind of things. Yeah.
Because like Amazon outrage on, was it a couple of days ago, I think a lot of sites and applications were all down just because one bug screwed things up.
Yeah. No, it's high risk. And
how? So the linear way of economics cannot integrate too big to fail concepts. The concentration of power.
Yeah, maybe they can, but the models don't. It doesn't fit in the models. I mean, every economist can see it, and they will shout about it when there's some kind of political crisis. But it's not in the typical planning models that are being used, and it's not in the financial models either.
But then I found it flabbergasting one, and I was like, how the hell?
Well, the reason is quite simple: is that the current models are based on what you can measure. And they were developed in the 19th century based on the
we're still using these old models.
Well, no, but they built on that. So lots of economics was built on the physics of the 19th century. So it was about equilibria and stuff like that. So economics assumes all kinds of equilibria, whereas usually there isn't even an equilibrium. But it's easier with math if there's an equilibrium. So, and that's how people have been trained.
I'm a little bit sort of like quiet because it's sort of money rules the world. Follow the money, and yet the money has no clue.
Well, some money does have a clue, but a lot of it is just run by algorithms, basically.
I spoke to Henjelle Reitsma. I don't know if you know him from RiskSphere. He does risk scenario analysis for national banks and insurance companies. and he introduces very similar scenarios, also from a, let's say, systems thinking perspective. What if, I don't know, climate change happens or let's say suddenly the North Sea starts to generate huge storms, then suddenly the insurance for, let's say, the greenhouses will become
unbearable.
Unbearable. Yeah. Or the sea level rise will make mortgages go under. So he's integrating a lot of these global scenarios and then stress testing them. And he also mentioned that the linearity of most risk managers or fund managers is very similar. But that makes me worried. Why aren't these schools of economics not pushing more from a systems thinking perspective and challenging the new generation of students that they should go beyond the linearity?
We're simply not there yet because most scholars are old school themselves. So they don't accept this view. They've been trained in the old way, and that's how they think and work. Those people are not going to convince the students because they don't even think in this way.
How are you making the change then? Because the fact that you're saying you should look more like a biologist resonates very well, because once you look from biology at the real life, you see interactions and
but I was already primed for it because of my history. I mean, I've been into this since 2009, basically.
Yeah.
So if I read a book in 2024, then about biology, then lots of pieces fit together. Whereas most people haven't been thinking about this for a very long time or at all. So, I mean, even most finance professors still think that shareholder value is the criterion, even if their politics says something completely different. They would still base all their work on shareholder value primacy.
Well, you're now working as a professor on Nijrode.
Yeah.
That means, are your classes full of students?
Yeah, but why do you ask?
Well, because you can now influence a new generation of students in a, let's use the word holistic.
Yeah, of course, and I do, but it's small numbers at a time. I mean, if I have, I cannot have more than 40 students in my M&A class, for example, or so. So, I mean, I see how many students a year? 100 or so.
No, but 100 at a time, they multiply themselves.
Yeah, but it would be much better if most business schools would be teaching this kind of thing, whereas in practice, just a few do this.
So on the practical level, because you write a book, you have written 2 books. You're also publishing a lot on your views on how capitalism can be more sustainable, or how finance can be more sustainable, let's say more in tune with the planetary boundaries and our spaceship Earth.
Yeah.
That means you're also talking to a lot of boards, CEOs, CFOs, and all the CXOs, to investors. What is happening there, and are you able to nudge them?
Yeah, I mean, but it's really hard to generalize about that, because you meet all kinds of people in all kinds of places, and I mean, we'd like to think about corporates as how shall I call it?
Big animals.
Yeah, but in practice, they are composed of people as well with widely differing views. I mean, I guess the large majority of people there, they just think in the way they've always been thinking, and it's just a small minority that are really actively trying to change things. And there's a lot of technocratic and unimaginative people in there, unfortunately. But there's also people who are really leading.
But what I've learned is if you show them the proof.
Yeah, that helps, but it doesn't mean they actually go into action.
But that's because they're bound by someone or somewhat?
No, because there's always more urgent stuff to do.
Interesting.
They have a task description, right? So there's so many behavioral limits to this. I mean, with Dirk Schramade, I've been teaching this sustainable finance course for years, and at RSM, and people there always came with, yeah, I'm very interested in doing this, but my colleagues don't want to do this. They're just assuming that the others are not interested, and then they don't take the initiative. That's one thing. They're always assuming that they cannot achieve anything without others. I mean, yeah, sure, but take the initiative. In my MBA students, I asked them to write an essay about the value creation at our company, the current situation, how finance function can change, or other functions can change, and what they can do. The what they can do part is always the weakest. It's very vague. I always have to ask them, no, what are you going to do next week? Who are you going to try to persuade, etc., etc.? They're always making their own role smaller than it is. Of course, exceptions bar, but the vast majority, they see themselves as just
that's because they're afraid to lose their job, or afraid to stand up, or afraid to be critical, or
I don't know if they're afraid. They're just not used to thinking beyond their role. It's just a very narrow task description. It's siloed thinking in many ways.
Yeah, which how organizations are organized.
Absolutely, yeah.
And only those on top.
Yeah,
make the horizontal connections.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So the where I see most leadership, I mean, for example, surprisingly, in the pension sector, among board members who see, hey, we have to invest for a better world, because what's the use of paying a good pension in a unlivable world? They know that some of their constituents are going to retire in 40, 50 years or so. They have to pay pensions, even for the current ones, until the end of the century, basically. So they have a long-term view, or should have. So they say we have to pay. Yeah, but their subordinates don't always have this long-term view. That's my problem. But they know
the cash out.
No, well, they have this vision. Hey, we have to pay a good pension in a livable world, which means that we have to invest for this better world as well.
Yeah.
And they're also convinced that in the long, that might hurt their returns in the short term, but in the long term, it actually helps their returns as well, their financial returns, by making it better. However, their struggle is to get the middle part and all the people doing the nitty gritty to think and act in that same way, because those people, they stick to those old models that they learned at their economics and law education. That's the problem. And in the financial sector, it's maybe even worse than in real companies, because in real companies, at least people are closer to the action and they can see opportunities, whereas financial companies are not really companies. They're just allocators of capital, and they do that based on numbers, and they don't see the real economy behind it anymore. Mm-hmm. That's a huge blindness. But in real companies as well, you have this problem that there's basically this dictatorship of the spreadsheets. So what people in MBA classes also complain about is like, I'm basically told by these finance guys, hey, you have to deliver this and this and this based on extrapolation of the past. So there's just way too much focus on what has been done before. And you see it also in the lobbying of companies, etc. And the political parties who say they're for entrepreneurs. In reality, or they're not for entrepreneurs, they're for the vested interest of old companies, right?
So basically what you're describing is the demise or the rebellion of the old economy, or the old way of doing.
Not a rebellion, but it's a resistance to change.
Resistance to change, yeah.
And it's normal, right? So if you look at transitions theory, and there's a lot of prominent transition theory people here in the Netherlands. So the Loorbachs and Rotmans and Scholz and Geels, etc. It's a typical pattern. The current regime is always going to resist change in several ways,
but it's the same with humans.
Yeah. But
change is the hardest thing.
But it's not only humans; it's also how a system is organized. I mean, there's this article by Geels from I think 2002 or so, where he describes transition from sailing ships to steamboats. Do you know how long it took? Over a century. And he gives all kinds of reasons for why that was the case. And for example, if you go from sailing to steam, you also have to go from a wooden hull to an iron hull. And you have to go from craftsmanship to an industrial production process. You need, there's all kinds of
new engineering.
Yeah. Yes. And that introduces so many causes of inertia, basically. And that's happening all the time, all over the place.
And then when the new system has structured itself, it doesn't want to. It wants to generate as much efficiency out of it. And
also, yes.
And then
and the old regime, it either
stubbornness, is that the right word?
Yeah, inertia, resistance, whatever. But there's a lot of that.
No, but it's because for me, I mean, for those who have children, they at least for me that was an eye opener, especially when they're young. When they don't get what they want, they scream, cry, and they do whatever to tell them, I do not agree with this new rule or what you're saying. And especially the last 5 years, you see that in the economy, big companies, no, we're not going to do that. No, we're going to not do it. We resist change. For me, it's like, I see the similarity with children. It's like,
but it's not a full story, because even the people who claim they want to change, they don't change as much as they claim to, because they're stuck in some kind of system.
Yeah, and you cannot change. Changing within is almost impossible.
Yeah.
Some of them make it work, but they tend to be family-owned businesses.
Well,
I know Ray Anderson from Interface, which is one of these.
But even there, it really depends on the context. I mean, yes, family-owned businesses or steward-owned companies, they have a higher level of intentionality of wanting to achieve change.
Yeah.
But even if the rest of your value chain doesn't accept your changes, you're still...
Yeah, you're stuck.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, I must ask this also, but then if you look at reporting and compliance, and I don't know if I read it from one of your posts of somewhere else in this field, corporate leaders so much to do at the moment with governance and compliance and following the rules, and the rules are getting more complex. Basically, you need a complete department now just to tick all the boxes and work on it. And
I don't really believe that.
Okay, yeah, that's good to know. Because I know it's from CSRD and ESG and GRI,
but they're making so much of a fuss about that, whereas they know or should know that the enforcement is not going to be there in the short run anyway, because it's impossible to enforce this.
But that's from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, but it's this legalistic approach of, we have to comply by the rules. Whereas if they had been doing their work, they would have been ready anyway.
Yeah, true.
It's
they
collect these data separately, whereas it should have been in their SAP system or whatever system they use. It should have been management information in the first place. The fact that it didn't collect it, I mean, it's just...
that's negligence or unawareness or no priority?
Short-sightedness, yes. Lack of priority, those kind of things, you know. And finance departments are extremely conservative as well.
But that's because they they need to report to their investors?
No, financing partners. I mean internally in companies,
So
they just have
the
to
internal accounting.
They have to report the numbers, and I mean they have all kinds of excuses as well, and partly valid. Like it, if they're if they're understaffed, it's already, and that's again the drive for efficiency. Then they already struggle to get their normal financials done, let alone do extra projects to gather the additional information.
And is AI helping in the annual reporting cycle?
Yeah, but then still you need people who are capable of working with that.
Yeah, and need to figure out whether it's doing its job or not.
Yeah. So the continuous drive for efficiency is simply not helpful here, because it just kills all your creativity.
Your first book. During your first book, we also met each other and had a lot of conversations. And I'm still.
You mean the Dutch book, or
the Dutch book?
Yeah.
I don't know which one actually, but
that's the book I wrote alone. The other two books I wrote with Dirk Schoenmaker. Yeah,
because there we sort of collaborated on the how do you call it in English? On the line of thought on value creation throughout the value chain, where there's no waste, no emissions. Basically, all matter has been valorized in a way that the system incorporates and puts it to new use, just like biology.
Yeah.
What were the lessons from that book for the way you're now working? Because we had a lot of talks with it. I think it was the coffee chain you picked up on that I described in one of the in my book that still has to be published one day when I have enough time to do that. So, but what are the key takeouts from that in your current work?
Well, because I wouldn't say there are key takeouts. I mean, it's just a continuation of the same kind of themes that you described in the beginning. So it's the importance of having the right governance, taking this holistic, indeed, value chain perspective, integrating sustainability issues or externalities in your analysis. So it's still the same kind of topics that have been part of all the things I've been writing. It's just that in articles you center more on specific issues. So we wrote indeed separate articles on corporate governance or the what discount rate to use for valuing these social and environmental externalities. So I wouldn't say there are specific takeaways that where I'd say it's more like most of the things have been reinforced. So also this value chain perspective, it continues to surprise me. One, how important it is, and two, how underestimated it is. And also the whole drive about reporting, etc. It's still so much centered on what the company itself does. Very limited scope of looking around and what it could do and stuff like that.
So basically, what you're saying is that companies and the system in which companies operate are not doing enough reflection on their on their purpose, on
yeah, well, there's a lot of talk about purpose, and they make nice statements on their purpose.
Yeah,
but I don't see it consistently in their actions.
We have a lot of examples. I mean, one of them could be Elon Musk with the Tesla and the battery chargers, and you cannot have electric cars without battery charging systems. So he developed both of them just to make sure that he has the infrastructure. However, the drive was at any cost, in disregard of what would happen in where the raw materials came from or what would happen with the cars. Just that is the future, and either left or right, but we're gonna get there. So it's also like the linear way of thinking of entrepreneurs, of these highly ambitious entrepreneurs who put, I don't know, what's side wings on their like where you have with horses and just follow it. And but I think one of the phrases of Silicon Valley was first break it and then
I think the Silicon Valley mindset is highly dangerous. It's unhealthy. Also, the kind of fascist ideas that are emanating from the top brass there, it's just very concerning about their values. And
that's interesting because a lot of focus, especially for the younger generation, is channeled towards Silicon Valley.
I know, but it's a toxic culture focused on success at all costs, at any price, meaning that you disregard a lot. And their value, they have really low regards for human life beyond their own life. That's clear from all their.
But it's also from a lot of American companies. Labor is not appreciated.
Yeah, no, that's why the country is drifting towards fascism in the first place. I guess it's somewhere in that's, well, let's not make it too political for too long, but it's very libertarian, and libertarian is to liberalism what communism is to social democracy, namely.
This just help me out on this one.
Well, it's an extremist
liberalism.
Liberalism is a healthy political movement, and so is social democracy, I would say. But communism is the extremist version of social democracy, and libertarianism is the extreme version of liberalism. In that it's. Yeah, it just puts it to such an extreme. Like libertarianism says we don't need government and we just compete each other away, etc. And it gives eventually the same results as communism, which says, the government has to run everything. But then who is the government, etc. And it's still, in both cases,
interesting.
You move into a more Chinese version style economy.
Yeah.
Where a few people decide what's good for the rest and they exploit the rest. And that's not the kind of society you would want.
That's interesting because this is just, I think, the third time in this conversation we come back to the values of Europe. And they are sort of watered down. I don't know why. Let's put it that way. But those on the high in the political spectrum, they then tend to be more. How do you call it? Verleid. Seduced to these ideas that would bring prosperity, between brackets, the question mark, to whom? Because I think that liberalism is also valid for the UK, isn't it? I mean, under Margaret Thatcher, or is that
that's
something I don't understand?
That's neoliberalism, but maybe we shouldn't dwell on the politics for too long. But I think lots of people in Europe are still aware of these values.
Yeah, so because
and actually this can survive here.
And what relationship is then B Corp to it? Because B Corp is sort of the movement originated also from the US by those who.
Yeah, but impact investing also comes from the US and charity as well. It's just that they need it even more there. Because the state doesn't do anything, right? It's the excesses that create the other extremes. Whereas the better situation is that you simply have what we basically had after World War II, namely what the Germans call soziale Marktwirtschaft, a social market economy, which was basically a compromise between German liberal economists and Christian Democrat politicians, where they concluded, and rightly, I think, after 2 world wars and lots of financial crises, that unfettered capitalism just results in chaos. And communism is also is even worse. So you want to avoid both extremes. So you go the Aristotelian way of being somewhere in the middle, and then what works best for most people is a market economy with good limits set by society, basically, and that means that government and other kinds of societal organizations have to make sure that market power is limited, that companies and others have to pay for the damages they do. Those kind of basic things.
Wealth distribution. I know from Rutger Bergman, who I think he mentioned it on WEF forum in Davos.
Yeah, fair taxes.
Yeah,
those kind of things.
And fair taxes used to be normal until the 60s.
Yes, indeed. So we've been going backward in that sense. And of course, in the 70s, there were lots of. It was overregulated, and then we deregulated in the 80s, which was still okay. But then we continued doing that during the 90s, etc. And then with social media, etc., we basically blew up democracy over the past 20 years. And it's not that hard. I mean, I saw a local Dutch political party in the center, of course. They wrote a manifest on progressive capitalism. And it read a lot like the stuff I say in my book. It's about making sure that you have these safeguards in place, that it doesn't go out of control, that no parties become too dominant, that competition can work, and where the outcomes are undesirable, you make corrections. It's really not that hard. But if you want to do that, the people on the right, they call you communist right away for it's just extreme exaggerations. And people on the left, they want to get rid of capitalism altogether because they think it hasn't delivered. So there's too much extremism nowadays in these ways, whereas previously I think there was much more common ground there.
And then it's interesting that the pension funds,
they accept this view. And that's because they feel the responsibility, whereas most politicians, I don't think they do. And most citizens are behaving too much like consumers, and they don't have this sense of responsibility either. So we're in that sense, we're not living in serious times, and that's why we get clowns as politicians. I mean, just look at the US. I mean, the word clown is an evil one at that.
We would
hard to put
politics out of the.
Now, and then to go back to your point, it's not just the entrepreneurs but it's also the standard corporates. They just think in way too linear ways.
That's also my experience from a consulting perspective. Once I'm at the table and I start to think more systemic and start to map their value chain, they become very, very uneasy.
Yeah, uncomfortable. Yeah.
Uncomfortable. Because the only thing I'm doing is visualizing the value chain and showing where the impacts are. And then sometimes I get from supply chain manager, no, compliance is the only thing what is important for us. So go back to the box of our company, and we have a third.
Exactly.
We have the third party checking whether our suppliers are compliant, and that's it. We do not want to have this was also from a company who was buying agriculture products for their business as a reseller of other products. No. We have a party, and we don't want to be busy with regenerative agriculture. We just want the constituents.
Yeah, well, I think that maybe that's the underlying theme then, that people are narrowing their own world in an extreme way.
That is interesting.
It's them, but it's also the people, the voters who are behaving like consumers, just not caring about what's happening and what the consequences are of their action. No, it's just about me and my small role, and I don't want to make it bigger. It's a lack of responsibility.
I would say. A similar conversation with a large brewery with the sustainability department, and I don't know how we ended up in this topic of water. And I did a brewery also for the book I still haven't published, where you just follow, in this case, follow the water, and a brewery needs 80% water intake just to produce the beer.
Yeah.
And the rest of the water is sort of dispersed and thrown away. So I asked the question, why are you not responsible for the water cycle? Why are you not responsible making sure that in your area there is rain? Because you need rain to sustain your brewery process. Now that was a way too far.
Yeah.
Go back to the box. We buy the water from a well, and
go back to the box is a great phrase. I mean, that's what people do all the time.
Then from your work, because you have value creation, you created a model using economic value, social value, and environmental value, which sounds a bit like the triple P from John Elkerton, but in a different way. But what is that you currently? Because one thing we agree on is that in a way it's a mindset change we need to happen, and we have been trained in a certain way. Losing that habit is extremely difficult if you not feel the pain, or you see an epiphany moment like you had in the past. You sound like, oh, it should be different. Is that model helping at least open up a dialogue, not a discussion, but open up a dialogue of how we have modeled things, and that the way it's operating now is creating so much friction that something needs to be restructured?
Well, there's a lot of things there, but I think lots of people are seeing that things need to change. But if I make my own box, if I go back to my box, then what I try to do is simply show people that they can put on different wider glasses than they currently do. Mm-hmm. So what I do in the MBA courses or in the courses for controllers, I ask them to do an integrated analysis of a listed company, typically Unilever or Alta has stuff like that, which we analyzed in our IX Future Proof Index. So we have all the data there. But I let them do the analysis. So I simply ask them, I give them the basics, and then ask them, okay, please explain to me what does the long-term value creation profile of this company look like? What does their financial value look like? Their social value, environmental value, pluses and minuses. Show me. And then what does it mean? How can they improve this? And in the controlling course, I even go a step further. I ask them, analyze this company, all these things, and find a takeover target that makes this company better in all respects, so that this takeover or this M&A transaction will improve the financial value, social value, and the environmental value. And they have to argue why that works. And it just forces them to take a much wider view of the value creation at this company for all stakeholders.
That's difficult.
No, because because we've done this so often, we now know kind of what hints to give them, what structure to give them to make that analysis. Yeah. And then, of course, it's for some people it's harder than for others, but people are very enthusiastic about the approach, because then fairly quickly they can get a sense of what matters here, and also why we want to express the social environmental value in monetary terms is that it becomes visible that the social and environmental value is typically much higher than the financial value of a company. Mm-hmm. And that's an eye-opener for people. People tend to think, oh, these are kind of small issues. No, they're not. For Unilever or Alta has the negative environmental value is a multitude of their market cap. their social value is also higher, and positive and negative. And the point is that you then see not a company that's, well, the typical financial analyst would only see the financial value creation. The typical NGO would only see the value destruction in qualitative terms. Whereas this is an integrated perspective, and you see, oh, this company does a lot of good things, it does a lot of bad things. How do we get to a pathway where we keep the good stuff and we get rid, or at least reduce, the bad stuff? And that invites them to think about what can that pathway look like. And then you can do that in two ways. You can simply look at it in the numbers. So if it's highly negative and you need to get to net zero by 2050, that means you have to reduce it by X%, etc. And if you know that, and you see that it has to change a lot, then it probably requires business model change. So what kind of business, what are the options then? What can you do? And it just raises the sense of urgency that something needs to change. And then typically what the resistance you get is like, oh, yeah, it looks very negative. So you have 2025, say that for a specific company, the financials look good, social looks good, environmental looks really bad. And by 2035, you want to have everything in order. And people would be scared, because if you change the business model, then likely the financials will suffer, and maybe the social as well, because you get turbulence because of the business model change. Sure, that's possible. But the alternative is, if you don't change, you might go out of business, and that's even worse.
Yeah.
So it's sketching it and making it more tangible, because finance, the great advantage of finance is with numbers, you can show sizes. It becomes more tangible, both in positive and in negative ways.
But so it's also a way of showing you're becoming a stranded asset.
Those kind of things, yes. And it's like finance is too powerful within companies. So
why are you saying that?
That's the terror of the spreadsheets, right? It's that they have to meet the budgets and stuff like that. That's killing so much creativity. So if you want to change that, you have to attack finance in that sense. You have to change finance. And all those non-finance people within companies, they better speak finance in this holistic way to argue with finance that their methods are outdated. And that's what I'm trying to achieve.
But that's also those frontrunners I'm talking to are actually doing that. I mean, I know Ray Anderson from Interface, who actually went to his accounting department and said, we're going to do it differently. And the accounting said, cannot. And he said, make it work. And then suddenly they realized, whoa, it is possible.
Yeah, but trouble is there's not that many leaders who take that rigorous action. I mean, recently I had a conversation with the CEO, and I knew him from years ago, but he said, yeah, my finance department just doesn't get it. What can I do? But he's not going to fire them, because in general they do a decent job, but not in terms of this wider perspective. And that's already in a quite positive situation where the CEO understands that strategically they're not delivering.
Yeah.
But he's not willing to take the next step of
educating them.
No.
Firing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's too risky.
Because then you're forcing them to make a change in their own perspective.
Yeah.
There are not enough. Are there enough finance people with the foresight of what it is that you are proposing?
No, because hardly anyone has been trained in this, and there's a negative selection in finance, I guess. Is that
negative selection? Yeah,
in the sense that you get how shall I put this nicely?
They do their job and that's it.
Well, there's already a selection in people who choose to study business, right? There's too many people just wanting to make money going in there, lack of imagination, those kind of things. And also a lot of blue people. So the ones who like order, structure, and they once they have this structure, they don't accept another structure, or
no, they're
not going to give up their structure unless they get a new structure.
Yeah,
and that's the perennial problem in finance, that they're not giving up their old system unless there's a new system which needs to be perfect right away. But that's impossible because the new system it has to be built up.
And I mean, those innovators tend to run their own consultancy companies. I'm sort of, I don't know if it's true, but does that mean that you need those forward thinkers into your company and you need to exchange? Because the reason why I'm saying that, I had a conversation with Leen Zevenberg, a serial entrepreneur, and I don't know what he does. He does a lot of things. And he calls these guys, or the investor spreadsheet cowboys, and basically you're underwriting his perspective on that. But also talks about courage, and be the agent for change.
Yeah.
What was it I saying? Yes, and he's mentioned there are and that was sort of the confirmation for me. There are so many consultants nowadays. The market has exploded. All the companies hire a consultant because they don't have the competence inside their own company to do. That's my perspective, to do the consulting. So why? I mean, is it also from the market we have created? Is that there is such a the really good people are not working for the real companies, but they've started a consultancy company because they have the freedom and
I don't know,
and dare to be different.
I don't have a strong opinion on that. And there's also the big consultants, right? But big consultancy companies, but they just bring the standard solutions. Yeah, no, it's hard to generalize on that.
Yeah,
I wouldn't know.
I just wanted to challenge, see if you have ideas on that.
No, I don't.
What is the biggest takeout or the biggest insight you have taken from the biological point of view? I've written down your nature's finance strategy is banking on diversity and effectiveness, but you also mentioned that the inefficiency and redundancy, which we can put on there. For those who are listening in and working in sustainable financing or sustainable impact investing, and feel by heart something is missing in their work, what would you give them for a road to look at?
That's quite a question.
Because you can have time to think, and I'll.
No, I mean, there's a lot of things in there again, but let's start with a biological perspective. One key lesson from that is don't trust the current models because they're way too limited.
Mm-hmm.
Just see them as some kind of input, but don't accept them as the full answer to the question, which most people do. And that certainly applies to people working in sustainable finance. Don't buy the models. Just don't accept them. Challenge them fully. And apply these principles of indeed redundancies versus efficiency. But also, a key challenge in sustainable finance or sustainable investing is that there's a huge confusion about what it really means. Most of the stuff that's called sustainable investing or sustainable finance is not sustainable. It's just about taking sustainability factors into account when making a decision. The goal of most sustainable investing, between brackets, is simply making a lot of money while taking account of sustainability. The goal is not to make the world better.
Mm-hmm.
So it's called the ESG input and ESG output distinction. ESG output would mean that you also care about the outcomes. So everyone working in sustainable finance or sustainable investing should ask him or herself, am I really working for better outcomes, or am I just processing, or am I just facilitating that we take some sustainability issues into consideration in some way, which is, I'm afraid, the bulk of what's happening in sustainable finance. I think the sustainable finance community is still fooling itself too much on small steps and worrying about data and compliance and stuff and avoiding the big questions.
It's interesting. Because more data is not necessarily better. You should.
No, people are always asking, if the data were better. No, you have to. First ask what question do we try to answer in the first place?
Yeah, that's what.
And the question is, how do we make an investment that's both financially attractive and socially attractive and environmentally attractive? That's the question you want to answer. The question is not, how do I get the best data? Or how do I get certified? Or something like that. Those are all side questions, and they have become the main questions for some reason.
Would that also involve that they should read Limits to Growth, the book? Because if you talk about data, they said we have too much data points. We have to bring it down.
True, it could be. Because also if you read the typical annual report, there's too much data in there, whereas the relevant data is not there. So
basically you need
different data. I mean, we did this IX Future Proof Index, and basically what we did there was that we estimated for all the stock listed companies in the Dutch main index.
I remember that.
Yeah, but the listeners probably don't know it. But it's so I have to explain it a bit. So in addition to the market cap, the financial value, we also estimated the positive social value, the negative social value, the positive environmental value, and the negative environmental value. And we also calculate the so-called future proofing ratio, which is basically all of that added together, divided by the financial value. And of course, if the ENS, the environmental, social, are net positive, then you get a ratio above 1. If they're net negative, then you get below 1. Where was I getting at? So what that showed us was not just the outcomes were interesting, namely that a lot of financial value is created at the expense of social and environmental value. I mean, most companies were net positive, but the minority were net negative, were so net negative that on average, it was still net negative. But what it also told us is that the corporate reporting on sustainability is woefully inadequate, because most of it we basically had to estimate based on alternative sources. I mean, sure, CO2 emissions are nicely in there for greenhouse for scope 1 and 2. Scope 3 is already a problem, and for financials, it's difficult. But all other issues like biodiversity, human rights, there's no unit values in there. It's just cheap blah blah about their policies, but we don't get any serious numbers on that. And for example, for Heineken, the beer company, yes, they talk about responsible alcohol, etc., but they don't tell us how much damage alcohol does. So what did we do? To give you an example, we basically took academic research on the negative health effects of alcohol, which was like 70 cents in per liter in Asia, €1.70 or 80 in Europe, and €4 or so in the US. And we basically took those numbers and we multiplied them by the amount of liters that Heineken sold in those regions. And we got to a massively negative number. And then, of course, Heineken said, oh, no, it's just nonsense. And they don't take into account all the pleasure that people get from alcohol. Well, actually, we do. But my whole point here is that the main source of value destruction of this company is simply not found in their annual report, because they don't report on this.
They don't want to report on that.
No, of course not. But with external sources, we can we can make these estimates and we can challenge them. Okay, if it's not correct, give me better data. If you sell more to bars than to supermarkets, then your damage is not as bad, because most problematic drinking is through supermarkets, not through bars. So give me better data and then I can make better estimates. But it's always estimates. And that's another challenge. People want exact numbers, whereas these are estimates.
There's an excuse for disregarding the estimates. Because it's not finite, so I cannot do it. But an estimate gives an indication. An indication gives a certain bandwidth.
Yeah. And that's good enough, but people don't accept it. But what they don't realize is that even the financials are estimates. Profits are just an opinion as well. It's
based on the reporting.
It depends on all kinds of accounting choices you make, and especially in the financial sector, it's almost a random number. In reinsurance, you only know how much profit you made years after, because you only know years later what kind of payments you actually have to make. And there's so many choices you have to make in accounting. I mean, there's this term EBITDA, earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Some people call it earnings before I tricked the dumb auditor. Right? There's a lot of subjectivity in financial numbers as well. But people take them as some kind of, no, it's set in stone, it's holy. No, you also don't know if they've been frauding it, right? So there's this, how shall I put it? It's there's
it's not sand, it's not carved in stone.
No, but they pretend it is. There's this pretension of security in there, and then they say that the rest is called subjective.
Just to challenge you, is that the arrogance of finance?
No, it's also what other people think, and
because actually, if the way you describe it, whether a company makes the number a company is reporting is just a number, and reality, because the choices you make. So actually, what you see, if a big, mostly corporates, you read that in the news because they have their reporting cycle and then they present their numbers. Even that is sort of like, okay, that's just a number. They make choices, and it could be more or less or whatever.
Yeah, and you can interpret it in several ways, and
it's interesting because then it is actually a social science.
It is definitely a social. No, and also, but the thing is, it's not just finance people who treat it as and especially accountants as very specific. No, it's also other people. I mean, often people challenge our approach on, but it's so subjective. And then I challenge them and saying, okay, but how precise do you think those financials are? And they don't have a clue. And then I can show them, hey, there's these ways in which you can manipulate this. And company A and B can have the same profit level, but if company B has to make a lot more investment in it than A, then actually it makes a lot less money, right? Because also people don't understand the difference between profit now and later, and investing and depreciation and stuff like that. Or if they use financial engineering for that, you really need an advanced financial mind for that to understand that part.
It's so complex.
Yeah, it's financials is there's a lot of trickery in there as well.
It's interesting.
It's definitely social science.
Because then the long shot, the big shot. There was the movie on the financial crisis in 2008 where they had these mortgages repacked.
Yeah, no, but that's even worse because I now talked about the financial numbers of real companies, right? And at least there's a basis in real activity, but the financial numbers of financial companies, it's even worse. They can be made up completely.
And that's what Henk Jelle also, I think, based on what you're saying, also insinuated. There was also the financial crisis I think it was also in the US where banks too big to fail that nobody really took the time to ask them to look into the numbers. Everybody assumed it's okay, and then suddenly a bank collapses, and then the bad accounting.
And money in general, it's based on trust, right? Money is not a hard thing.
No, not true.
It only works if there's trust. And if people don't trust a bank, there's a bank run and it's going to fall.
Yeah.
Even if it's been doing everything right, it will fail just based on the lack of trust.
And then we go back to the cycle about purpose, values, ethics, and creating a better world with that perspective. If there is somebody listening and he has been challenged by our conversation, he can sign up for a course, or is it actually an annual run, or is it?
Well, the courses I teach are in our regular programs at Nijrode, but we also have a MOOC, a massive open online course, based out of RSM, so that's where Dick Schoenmaker teaches. You can follow that for free.
Which is also very similar to what we've discussed.
You get the same kind of concepts there. Our latest book, Corporate Finance for Long-Term Value, you can download it for free. So we paid the publisher instead of getting paid for it, just to make sure the PDF is free. So you can simply download that. If you want to read the basics, please read chapter 2 of that book. If you want to do all the number crunching, read the rest as well. So those are things to think about. I think the other is you're right. It starts with the ethics and it starts with the rules. So if you are an entrepreneur and you want to build a company for the long run, you have to build a structure where you don't give away your company to your investors. You want to build a structure where it becomes steward-owned, where a foundation holds the controlling shares and can ensure that it remains mission-aligned. And then it cannot be taken over by some big tech company that just wants to make a killer acquisition to kill you, or by some a large corporate that may want to use your IP, but also destroys it. Now, if you want to ensure the long-term viability of your company, you have to make sure the business model is right and that it stays right by enshrining the mission in your corporate governance. That's a great way to start. And ideally, we had corporate law systems in which that was facilitated. So that I mentioned the political parties manifest, and one of their points is that, hey, we should facilitate legal structures that help people build steward-owned companies. And steward-owned companies, they've been actually, there's quite a few of them, especially in Scandinavia and in the German-speaking companies, where, especially in the 19th century, the founders of large companies, they basically put the shares in foundations, and these foundations are in control, and they may pay some dividends to the family of the founder, but it's still about keeping the mission.
Yeah, and then have a long-term vision.
Yeah. And then if you're struggling with the question, so how do I make decisions? Well, we have that in the book as well. Like, if you're successful on financials, on the socials, but not in the environmental, then the environmental is the first thing you need to fix. If your mission is on the social side, then that has to be stronger as well. It's all context dependent.
Yeah.
We have lots of calculations there, but even there,
it's a model.
It's a model. Start from your own situation. Keep in mind the big questions, the intuition, and just use the models as guidance, but not as the answer. Keep thinking for yourself, and don't make yourself smaller than you are. That would be my main advice.
Thank you, Willem.
You're welcome.
I'm pleased you took time to listen to the whole episode. Why not consider joining my Patreon to support me in creating more of these conversations? or even rate my podcast in your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for listening, and join me next time.